Power didn't fall in Burkina Faso. It paused, changed its shape, and waited. For 3 years, the man once commanding a nation lived as if distance erased accountability, believing silence could outlast truth. But under Ibrahim Traoré's tightening command, the illusion began to break. What seemed forgotten suddenly became evidence, and exile turned into exposure. And when the doors finally opened, the question was no longer who ruled, but how far power was willing to run before being caught. You are about to hear what most headlines left unsaid. Behind the swift extradition of a former leader lies a deeper question: how a single operation exposed a system built on silence, loyalty, and fear. By the end, you will see how power in Burkina Faso doesn't just fall. It mutates, adapts, and returns under new forms. And this isn't a story for those who listen casually. If you stop here, you'll think this is just another arrest. If you walk away, you'll miss the chain that connects exile, money, and the survival of a state under siege. If you ignore it, the next time power changes hands, you'll have no idea who is really pulling the strings. Understanding this case isn't entertainment, it's awareness. The only thing that stands between information and manipulation. Because when Ibrahim Traoré speaks of sovereignty, the real battle isn't fought in speeches, but in what the world is not supposed to see. The first cracks appeared quietly. Within weeks of the new year, arrests rippled through Burkina Faso's security apparatus. Names once considered untouchable suddenly replaced, questioned, or missing, and then came the signal no one could ignore: an extradition that took days instead of years. In West Africa, that kind of speed doesn't happen by accident. Investigators revealed that on January 3rd, a single phone seized during a domestic arrest unlocked everything. Inside were recordings, voices discussing sabotage, timing, and coordination. Among them, one name echoed louder than all: Damiba. The evidence didn't suggest a rumor. It suggested a plan. At first, many thought it was just political theater, but the data told another story. Transfers of $125,000 to $128,000, messages sent through encrypted apps, and orders that spoke not of pressure, but of elimination. When traced back, each fragment pointed toward a structure, not an impulse. The escalation was immediate because the danger was internal. Drone bases, the same ones used to fight jihadist groups, were allegedly marked for destruction. In a war zone, disabling drones isn't rebellion. It's suicide. That was when the line between ambition and treason blurred completely. Those first affected were the intelligence units closest to Ibrahim Traoré. They saw what few outside could grasp. This was not revenge. It was containment. The arrest abroad wasn't a show of dominance. It was an act of survival. And for a region used to impunity, that realization changed everything. The name most Burkinabe now associate with the turning point is Ibrahim Traoré. He didn't appear as a distant ruler, but as a commander who saw the pattern before it unfolded. Within days of the January arrests, his circle realized that hesitation was risk. A single compromise could cost an entire command structure. Those early hours defined the tone of what followed. Intelligence officers spoke of encrypted messages, intercepted transfers, and long nights verifying who could still be trusted. One officer, whose base had nearly been targeted, described the discovery in a single sentence. "We weren't hunting ghosts anymore. We were closing in on colleagues." That was when the story stopped being about a coup and became about infection from within. And it wasn't confined to the capital. Reports surfaced of smaller detachments suddenly changing leadership, communication lines collapsing, and field operations freezing mid-mission. What had begun as an investigation was turning into an emergency protocol. Because if betrayal could reach command level, it could reach anywhere. From that moment, no one in uniform felt untouched. And that is when the story of one extradition turned into the survival test of an entire state. Everything began to unravel the moment a single arrest exposed the first link. January 3rd, 2026, an officer detained in Ouagadougou. His phone unlocked not just messages, but an entire network. Calls traced across borders, payments disguised as logistics, and instructions recorded with military precision. The signal went straight up the chain, reaching a man who had once ruled the country and believed exile meant immunity. The first phase was ignition. Within hours, operations were triggered, security sweeps, communication lockdowns, and quiet detentions. Panic spread faster than confirmation. Soldiers whispered, commanders rechecked orders, and diplomats in neighboring states began to ask, was Damiba really behind it? Then came the escalation. Evidence grew impossible to contain. Each confession named another, each message another link. The sum of money, roughly $125,000 to $128,000, became the thread tying the operation together. Small enough to hide, large enough to corrupt. Drone operators reported interference. Supply routes were compromised. The machinery of defense began to falter, and then silence. Not peace, but calculation. Orders were no longer shouted. They were encrypted. Targets were not cities. They were people. The chain of command was infected, and hesitation meant death. The aftermath hit harder than the exposure. Air bases fortified, officers reshuffled, trust fractured. Burkina Faso's army moved like a wounded animal, fast, defensive, unpredictable. But amid that chaos, one truth hardened. The coup had failed, yet the threat survived. For Ibrahim Traoré, this was no victory lap. It was a race against time to prevent the state from tearing itself apart from within. They called it evidence, but it felt like a map of corrosion. Each report, each transaction, each recording traced the outline of a system that had stopped working as a barrier and started functioning as a weapon. The intelligence files revealed patterns, the same accounts, moving the same amounts, the same names orbiting each other through encrypted trails. The numbers didn't lie. They showed how infiltration works when loyalty can be bought. One figure stood out first, over $125,000. A small fortune in a country where most live on less than $3 a day. That money didn't build anything. It bought silence. It bought betrayal. It paid for chaos to look like coincidence. Then came the second measure, $15,000, transferred to a single Air Force officer for logistics. When traced, it matched an encrypted voice message giving instructions about drone flight paths. The conclusion was simple: loyalty had been weaponized. And the third number hit hardest: 3 days. That's how long it took from the first arrest to Damiba's extradition. In a region where legal processes can stretch for years, 3 days is not a timeline. It's a signal. It said the system had chosen survival over ceremony. Those three anchors, money, command, and speed, shifted the narrative from rumor to fact. What once looked like an internal dispute revealed itself as an existential threat. Because at that scale, the numbers no longer measure currency or time, they measure how close a nation came to losing itself. There were those who said the extradition was excessive, a political gesture wrapped in legality. They argued that Ibrahim Traoré had simply used procedure as performance. A show of strength meant to silence dissent. Others believed the opposite, that without speed, the state itself might have fractured beyond repair. Both sides had logic, and both deserved to be heard. The first argument rested on fear of a precedent. If a former leader could be seized so swiftly, what stopped future governments from doing the same to anyone who opposed them? It sounded reasonable until the details surfaced. The operation was not a sweep of rivals. It was a targeted strike based on verified communications and material evidence. When the choice is between rumor and risk, containment stops being theater. The second argument came from analysts wary of escalation. They asked whether exposing the network publicly could deepen instability or invite retaliation. The question carried weight, yet it ignored one fact: silence had already become danger. Once intelligence confirmed that officers within drone operations were compromised, every minute of secrecy meant another potential attack. Transparency in that moment wasn't risk, it was defense. When both positions meet, the outline sharpens. Strength without restraint is tyranny. Restraint without strength is collapse. The truth lies in endurance, the capacity of a state to protect itself without devouring itself. And in that fragile balance, Burkina Faso's future was being measured one decision at a time. And then everything changed. What began as a security operation turned into a reckoning. Hidden alliances surfaced. Voices once dismissed as rumor were suddenly played back in courtrooms. The name Damiba stopped being a whisper. It became evidence. But the deeper revelation was not who fell. It was how close the fall came to reaching Ibrahim Traoré himself. Until that moment, many believed the danger had passed with the arrests. It hadn't. The recordings hinted at a sequence, an assassination plan designed to strike not once but several times, targeting senior figures and drone infrastructure simultaneously. It wasn't just a coup, it was an attempt to blind the state. That discovery reframed the entire narrative. What had seemed like revenge you'd now read as prevention. What looked like a purge became a containment line drawn in desperation. And from that point forward, nothing was the same. Every officer vetted, every signal traced, every conversation replayed through the lens of a new awareness. The enemy wasn't only outside the borders, it had been inside all along. Behind closed doors, a new question surfaced, one that still hangs over the capital. If betrayal can grow from within, what must collapse before trust can return? The fallout arrived in waves. What had begun as one extradition now rippled through every layer of the Burkinabe state. The first to feel it were those in power. Ministers found themselves caught between loyalty and liability, balancing the need for stability against the demand for accountability. Policies that once took months to draft were now rewritten overnight. Trust became a scarce resource. For the government, the message was brutal. Any hesitation could be read as complicity. Ibrahim Traoré's administration responded by tightening command protocols and increasing oversight on intelligence budgets. Every reform carried a shadow. What if another network was waiting to fill the void? For businesses, the crisis came in numbers. Foreign partners froze contracts. Domestic investors hesitated. Cash flow dipped by double digits within weeks, and insurance costs climbed. A country already struggling against insecurity now faced economic paralysis. But beneath that anxiety was something harder to quantify: a loss of predictability, the oxygen of markets. For ordinary citizens, the story hit differently. It wasn't about geopolitics, it was about groceries, fuel, and fear. Rumors traveled faster than official statements. Prices rose, patience fell, and conversations turned cautious. Yet among all that exhaustion, a quiet pride emerged. People whispered that maybe, finally, impunity was ending. And for the region, the message echoed loudest. West African capitals began re-evaluating their own alliances. If Burkina Faso could extradite a former head of state in days, no leader could assume distance meant safety. The precedent was set. When the dust settled, no sector remained untouched. Power had moved, but its consequences had only begun. The most probable path forward is neither triumph nor collapse, but endurance. Burkina Faso, under Ibrahim Traoré, will likely continue consolidating security while trying to maintain fragile alliances. Trials will unfold slowly, revealing more networks, while the government balances vigilance with the risk of overreach. It is a path of controlled tension, steady enough to survive, brittle enough to break. In the best scenario, the shock becomes a lesson. Institutions reform faster than they fracture. Cooperation within the military strengthens instead of splintering. External partners, reassured by procedure and stability, begin to return. The economy steadies, drone bases expand, and the sense of national ownership deepens. It is not perfection, but recovery earned through discipline. The worst case is quieter and darker. Fear replaces vigilance. Political rivals weaponize the investigation. Trials stall. Suspicion becomes policy. If that happens, the state could survive the coup, but lose the people. A slower, invisible collapse that begins with fatigue and ends with silence. Whichever path unfolds, one fact remains constant. Resilience is not inherited, it is built choice by choice under pressure. And the smartest choice may not be to predict the future, but to stay alert enough to shape it. For those watching from afar, it's easy to treat this as another story of politics and power. But for those living inside Burkina Faso, it is personal. It changes how they work, how they speak, how they trust. The line between citizen and witness has blurred. If you are one of the people who follow these events daily, you already sense the shift. You read patterns, watch alliances, and know that vigilance itself has become survival. Keep doing that. Keep verifying. The future favors those who stay informed when noise grows loudest. If you are affected indirectly, through business, trade, or family, you are part of this story too. Every delay, every market reaction, every travel restriction ripples outward. Prepare, adjust expectations, stay adaptable. These are not times for certainty, but for readiness. And if you've watched in silence, thinking it does not concern you, remember this. Neutrality does not shield anyone when institutions tremble. Information, not distance, is protection. Because whether you lead, work, or simply live here, understanding the truth of this moment decides whether you stand still or keep moving forward. Solutions cannot live in slogans. They live in structure. Ibrahim Traoré has said as much himself. Without discipline, reform collapses into rhetoric. So the next steps must be concrete, measured, and visible. Step 1 begins with leadership. The state must finish what it started. Transparent trials, verified evidence, and a communication policy that informs without inflaming. The timeline should be months, not years, and success must be measured by restored trust, not political noise. Step 2 belongs to institutions and businesses. Rebuild the logistics chain that the plot threatened, tighten financial oversight, and invest in counterintelligence training. Stability doesn't come from silence. It comes from systems that detect threats before they metastasize. Step 3 is for citizens. Awareness must replace fear. Community reporting lines, local defense units, and responsible media matter more than slogans. When the public knows how the state protects them, belief becomes defense. Some advocate for regional cooperation as step 4, shared intelligence and joint monitoring across Sahel borders. The faster patterns are recognized, the harder it becomes for shadow networks to regroup, because in the end, resilience is not built by arrests. It is built by what happens after them. When the dust finally settled, the story circled back to its human center. The same officer who once said, "We were closing in on colleagues," now spoke of something else, exhaustion mixed with resolve. He had seen betrayal, but also the moment it broke. And in that pause, he understood why Ibrahim Traoré kept repeating one phrase, "Endurance is our only victory." From the first arrest to the courtroom lights, the journey had been brutal, yet it carried a strange symmetry. What began as exposure ended as clarity. A nation that had doubted its own strength learned that resilience is quieter than revolution. Because this was never only about Damiba, or exile, or coups. It was about the weight of trust and the cost of reclaiming it. Every decision, every broadcast, every silence was a test of whether power could finally serve survival instead of a fear. And at that crossroads, one truth lingered like breath in the night. Justice is not an event. It's a process that demands the courage to keep going. In the end, the question left behind was simple but heavy. How long can a nation keep standing when the truth itself becomes its final battlefield? Everyone who has followed this story feels it differently. Some hear it as a warning about how power corrodes. Others see it as proof that accountability is still possible. But for most, it's a reminder that no country heals in silence. If you believe this story matters, let it travel. Share it not for attention, but for understanding, so that others see how easily nations can lose their balance when truth becomes optional. Let it reach those who think Burkina Faso's struggle is distant, so they understand that sovereignty anywhere depends on awareness everywhere. And if you've stayed through every moment of this account, then you're already part of the conversation. Because what decides the next chapter is not who commands headlines, but who keeps asking questions when they fade. So I'll leave you with one. When the next storm comes, will we recognize it soon enough to stand together again?